I'm Erica.
And I'm CJ.
And you're listening to the Her Podcast. Today's episode, we have the privilege of sitting down with the incredible Jasmyn Albert, owner of Nokam Okiskamoana. Jasmyn, a Plains Cree, Métis, settler, educator, and devoted mom, brings a wealth of experience and passion to the forefront. Growing up immersed in her culture, she cherishes the teachings and traditions passed down through generations, and she's committed to sharing these invaluable gifts, especially with the youth. Through her work with schools across Canada via Connected North, Jasmyn has had wonderful opportunities to showcase the richness of Plains Cree culture and challenge misconceptions that have historically clouded our understanding. In today's conversation, we chat about all sorts of different things, some of which include Jasmyn's upbringing, misconceptions of the Plains Cree people, the significance of cultural preservation, and how she believes that her people are more than just their trauma. We really think you're going to find a lot of value in this one. So as always, turn it up and enjoy. I want to know, to kick things off, we were like thinking about you, obviously, as you were coming, and I was like, because I've interacted with you a little bit, and something I've said to whoever I end up talking about you to other people, I'm like, what I've appreciated so much about Jasmyn right off the hop is just like a straightforwardness and just like a really openness in conversation, which I like from the moment I met you at that first photo shoot, I was like, she's just like, hey, what's up? Like very calm and just easy to talk to. But I'm really curious what like little Jasmyn was like growing up.
So it's funny because I actually just was thinking about this because I do really well in chaos. I do really well in like moments where everyone else around me is like really nervous or like stressed and all that kind of stuff. And I've always been the kind of person that has to like bring the balance. You know, like I'm always like, I was thinking about it and I was actually talking to my boss recently and we were late for an event that we had planned. And I was like, it's going to happen how it's meant to happen. It's okay. Remain calm. Like, well, it's not going to start if we're not there. So we're not missing anything. So, you know, I was like, it's okay, you know? And, but inside I was like, oh my gosh, I hate being late. And like, you know, so
preach.
Yeah. So I was like, I just had to balance out her anxiety, and I've always been that way. Little Jasmyn I had a lot of responsibility, so I had to be that way. But yeah, so
what kind of responsibility did you have?
Okie dokie.
Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen.
Adjust it all.
Okay, so I am the oldest of four, and when I was younger, my dad left when I was 13, and my mom and dad always had a really unhealthy relationship, so it wasn't like the worst thing that could happen. And then my mom fell into an addiction, and so that's just how she handled her trauma and her pain and everything. And so I became responsible for my siblings at 13, and so I had a lot of responsibility. So I had to like make sure they got to school, and I got to school, and cook and buy groceries and do laundry, all the things an adult has to do. Like I learned how to budget, and I learned how to like look in a flyer and like be like, okay, ground beef's on sale at Co-op, and then like Crafter's on sale at Superstore, and like Campbell soup's on sale at Safeway. And then I would call my cook and I'd be like, okay, I have my grocery list prepared. Can you take me grocery shopping? And then she would come pick me up, and we would go to stop at all the stores. And then I had to plan my meals according to what was on sale. Right. And so it was
at 13.
Yeah. And so, and then my mom also worked away at that time. So like she was in addiction and then also working out of town. And so, yeah, I had a lot of responsibility. And then that was until I was like 18. And when I was 18, I moved out on my own, and then my siblings came with me. So
you like moved out, but you're like, not really.
Yeah. They were like, my youngest sister was like, well, I want to come live with you too. And I was like, oh, okay. And so
you saw that freedom.
Yeah, I did. I got a taste of it. And I was like, all right, I think I was like maybe a month with myself and my husband. We lived just us. And then, yeah, all these years, like one or two siblings has always came to live with us. And so, yeah, I've always had a lot of responsibility. So like, I just had to be confident as well. Like I had to, go into situations where, like most young kids don't have to go into, you know, like social workers would come to our house and I'd have to like just appear to be older, you know, and like give this energy and this idea to people that, you know, like we had it all together, right? And so I feel like that has come out in my adulthood as well now, because now like I go into situations where like I'm usually really uncomfortable. Like even today I'm like, oh my gosh, like driving here, I'm like having good vibes, like really focusing on like good things, and I just have to kind of convince myself like, well, first of all, I was always taught like how it's meant to happen is how it's going to happen. So like don't stress, right? Like what's the point of stressing if it's going to go how it's meant to go? So if things don't go the way you were hoping for them to go, they were meant to go that way. So why would you worry about it? But then I also like, I just have to come off into this way that like it's okay, you know, things are good. And I always want people to feel comfortable around me too, right? So like I feel like I want people to feel like I'm a safe space and that I'm like non-judgmental and very open-minded, and like I just want people to know that I'm genuine and that like I'm here to support them in however they might need, right? And so maybe that means like I give them a really good hug, or maybe that means
Which you gave.
I was just gonna say you're a good
like
hugger.
at Evoke when you came up, or when we were like, hey, we both afterwards were like, Jasmyn gave us like the nicest hug,
which is funny because I'm not a hugger. Like I don't.
But we were just like, hey,
yeah. But I know other people are huggers, so like I meet them where they're at, right? And so
you're like, these girls need like a little comfort.
You know, and sometimes
you need to wear a shirt.
Yeah, sometimes maybe that's just how what people need. So I just always want people to feel like they're safe with me, and I'm there, like I said, to support them wherever they're at, whatever they might need. Maybe that means like somebody that just listens. Maybe that means someone that shares like a story that works with where they're at, or especially when I'm working with youth, you know, I like share a little bit about my story. You know, I want them to know that like there's light at the end of the tunnel, and it's okay for you to like cry and break down, but it's just, you just don't give up, you know. Like that's one of the things that I always tell youth when I work with them is like, and it's not your fault. Like I always tell youth, I'm like, it's not your fault. Where your circumstances are not your fault. And so, you know, so that's a then and now, and how they coincide with one another.
So you were clearly a big support person for your family. Where were you finding support?
My cookum or myself.
Yeah. I want to ask about the impact of your cookum on
you. You're going to make me cry.
Oh, I'm so
We've got Kleenex.
It's okay.
I cry
we can talk about it. We can talk about it.
But I was like, I want to ask that, but like at the same time, in tandem, I want to ask about, because we're in kind of your younger years, but it also goes with cookum. Because one thing I noted right away when I started following you was your pride in your heritage and in being Indigenous, and more specifically, Plains Cree. Right?
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, was that always the case for you?
No. So when I was really young, like grade 1 to like maybe grade 8, I would say, I didn't like being Indigenous. I don't look that Indigenous, so people always question me. And then I don't belong to a reserve, so I'm non-status. But I recently got my Métis status because I found out my gramps is Métis, which is a whole story of its own. But I wasn't really proud. And it's funny though, because I found friends that also looked very white. And then now that I'm an adult, they're all Indigenous. And I'm like, it's so funny how like, and it is a thing. Most Indigenous people, they will gravitate towards other Indigenous people, right? Like when they walk into a room, they're like, where's another brown face? And that's where they go. It's just how it is, you know, community, and like that's a safe space essentially. But I wasn't always proud. Like I always got called like Pocahontas. I used to have like hair down to my butt and like past my butt until I was in grade 5. And my mom would put it into 2 braids every day. And people called me Pocahontas, and they'd like pull on my hair. And then I switched schools. And so I got to create a whole new me, right? Like I had like grade 1, 2, I was at that school. And then 3, 4, 5, I was at a different school. And that's where I always got bullied about being Indigenous. I got like cornered in the bathroom and beat up and all kinds of stuff. And then I went to this new school, well, an old new school, where I had met some friends, but again, they didn't know who I was or like what I was, right? And so I wasn't always proud. And I struggled with that, I would say, until I was in high school. I was a little bit, like, I remember in high school, I tried to advocate for Indigenous people. I was trying to advocate for the Indigenous people at our school. And like one of the times I went into the principal's office, and we had like a cultural day. And so it was like a cultural week, and we had like Ukrainian dancing, and we had like a Chinese dragon celebration, and we had like all this kind of stuff, like African dance troupe and all, but we had nothing for Indigenous people. So I went to the vice principal, and I said we should have a space for Indigenous students. Like we should have like an Indigenous Students Council, or and of course at that time it was like Aboriginal or First Nations, right? And so I said that to him, and he's like, well, we don't have the population. And I was like, well, we do. We're West Side Saskatoon. We definitely have the population.
I was going to ask you, like, where were you going to school? And I kind of figured, but yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up on the west side of Saskatoon. So my whole life I've lived over there. But yeah, and he's like, no, we don't have the population and we don't have the staff. And then so I went to another teacher that was Indigenous, and she taught the Native Studies class. And I was like, well, I went to so-and-so, and he said, no, like, what do I do? And she's like, well, go back and tell him I will be the teacher for the group. So I went back and I told him, and he was like, no, like, we don't have the funds. And I was like, there's nothing we have to pay for. Like, we just want a space where we can gather and we can celebrate our heritage and smudge and, you know, do things that our way. And it was really pushed back, and I got really, really mad. And me and this admin butted heads a lot. He definitely played a part in like my shame of being Indigenous, and like realizing that like you're gonna get told no more than you're told yes. But the teacher that I had went and talked to, she really encouraged me to like be like, it's okay, like, it just, you know, one no, you're just gonna keep pushing, right? And so I eventually left that school, and I found myself at Oskāyak High School, which is on Broadway. A little history about Oskāyak High School, because most people don't know, and I'm really proud to know about this. So it was founded in the 80s, and it was called Native Survival School when it first opened. It was called Native Survival School because parents got together and they pitched to the school divisions, the public and the Catholic, and they said, like, our children are literally dying in these schools, in these urban institutions, and they're not getting an education that they deserve. They're not able to learn their culture. They're not able to do any of that stuff, and they deserve a safe space. And so it was through parents that this place came to be. And my cookum actually worked there. She was the nutritionist when it first opened, and then over the years became like the cultural advisor and the elder. And so I found myself at Oskāyak after complaining and crying to my cookum about how, like, they don't get me, like, they don't support me. Like, I was going through things at home, and I remember telling my teacher, like, this is what's happening at home. And she's like, well, you need to go talk to the social worker and let her know right now. And then you need to come back and write your math assessment. And I was like, don't want to write my math assessment right now. I'm not in a headspace to do that. So can I write it later? And she's like, well, then you'll just have to like go back to grade 10 math, because this is grade 11 math, because we don't know where you're at. And I was like, oh, whatever. So I remember going to the social worker and like telling her, naively thinking that this is a safe space and I can tell her truthfully what's going on. And I went to her and I said, like, this is what's going on at home, and so this is why I don't want to write my math assessment. And she's like, oh, well, you need to go talk to the principal. And so then I go talk to the principal and the vice principal, which, as I previously said, we did not see eye to eye, the vice principal and I. And I was told, like, this is why your people don't amount to anything. Like, this is because I said, like, I just don't want to be at school right now. Like, I just want to go home. And he had said to me, this is why your people don't amount to anything. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I got up out of that meeting and I grabbed my backpack and everything out of my locker and I walked home. While I was walking home, I called my cookum on my cell phone. And I said, like, can you come get me? Like, I don't want to be at this school anymore. And she's like, okay, well, where are you going to go? And I was like, I want to go to your school now. And she's like, I don't know if it's for you, you know, like she was really hesitant and was like, I think just because she didn't want like that granddaughter, grandmother, but also now she's a teacher where I'm at. Like it, you know, it could come off in not a good way. It could come off where like I'm getting things handed to me or things like that. So she didn't want that. And so I was like, no, I really want to go to your school. Like I need that right now where I'm at in life. And at this time, my mom had just went into treatment. So after 4 years of active addiction, she had agreed to go to treatment. My 2 youngest siblings went to go live with our dad in New Brunswick. And so it was like just me and my younger sister. She's 2 years younger than me. And our mom wasn't there at the time she was in treatment, right? So it was just her and I at home. And I was like, I can't be at school right now, like at that school anyways. And so my cookum was like, okay, yeah, you can come to our school then. And so I went and I registered and I just loved it. Like there was a mentor program where I got to meet with like another Indigenous person that was a professional, and she actually was my mentor like all the way until I was in post-secondary, and she like supported me and like helped me write my resume. So there was like that kind of program there. There was a lunch program. I was always forgetting lunch when I went to school. There was a lunch program, there was a breakfast program, there was a bus pass program, there was all of these supports. There was elders that were there. Like there was the late Danny Musqua, and he was an amazing storyteller and an amazing elder, and like he made you feel like you were his grandchild every time you saw him. And like especially for Indigenous people, like our grandparents, like that were like, for all people it's a special relationship, but for Indigenous people it's just like so sacred to have like that mushum and that cookum, and like to have those people that like are there to support you. And so he always made everyone feel welcome. And then my cookum was there, right? So while I couldn't get into much trouble, because like she would know so quickly, I couldn't skip class, I couldn't do any of that stuff. So like it really was what I needed at that time, because when I went to the other school, like I would just leave. I would just like, meh, I don't want to be here anymore. Walk out of class, be late every single day. And with my cookum, she would pick me up for school, and so she would drive me. And so like there was no being late. In fact, there was like an hour early every day. So there was that. And it's there that I really found pride in who I am. It's there that like I got to smudge every day. Every day they had a smudge. We had a sweat for different grades. Every month was a different grade, and so you got to go twice, maybe 3 times, depending on like if you're in like a class where it's like grade 10 and 11 math. Then sometimes they'd be like, okay, well the grade 10s are going to the sweat, so well you're in grade 11, you might as well just come too, right? So we got opportunities to attend ceremony, opportunities to speak my language, opportunities to hear other stories. Like I grew up with my cookum stories, but I got to hear other elder stories. And I also got to realize that like I am not alone. There's so many other people that were going through what I was going through at like 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. There's other people that are the same age as me that also take care of their siblings. There's people that, also have parents that are struggling with addiction, that also have one parent or no parent homes, that live with their cookum, that live with their aunties and uncles, that, like my whole world was opened up, and like I got to hear other people's stories, and I just found myself in those stories. And so, part of me got angry because I was like, this shouldn't be our story. Like, this isn't okay that this is, all of us are living in poverty. All of us are struggling or have people in our families that are struggling with addiction. All of us are struggling with like houselessness and all that kind of stuff, So I did have this feeling inside me that was like angry, but at the same time, I was so proud that like we're still here, that we're still learning our culture, that this school is still standing, and has like, I was with my cookum growing up. I got to hear how many times they tried to shut it down. Like how many times I had to say, there's no funding, there's no money for this anymore, there's no money for that anymore. And my cookum always said, that's okay, we'll find it. That's okay, we're still going to be here. We're still a school. You know what? It doesn't cost money for us to go pick medicine. So we're going to just go pick our medicine, and we'll still smudge with our students. We'll fundraise so an elder can come in and do pipes. So I got to like, I grew up hearing that. And so I was really, really proud to be part of that place. And that's where I found my voice. Like I got to be in places, like I got to pitch different programs to different places. Like I got to go to the Catholic school division and talk about like this playground development that we had designed, because one of the things with education is sometimes you give up when you don't get to see it fall through. So like, you know, sometimes they'll like create this business plan and it's like, okay, well, who cares? It's not going to happen. But we got to create a playground that was actually going to be at a school, and that was actually going to be at like a daycare. And so, you know, I got to learn how to advocate for myself and for my people and for youth and all that kind of stuff by being there. And so that's how I slowly became proud of who I am.
Okay, friends, listen up. I recently tried a new product and it's actually so amazing and so delicious. Have you heard of Niva snacks? Well, if you have, then you know how great it is. And if you haven't, then you can thank me later for introducing you to them. Niva is the perfect on-the-go breakfast or snack. You know how we all had our favorite childhood cereal that we loved, and whenever we got it, it was like a major treat? Well, that's what Niva has recreated, only this time it comes with a dose of protein. All you have to do is get your Niva cereal pouch, pour it into your shaker cup, add your milk, shake, and boom, a delicious and protein-infused breakfast. Niva has taken your favorite childhood cereal and turned it into an on-the-go protein snack that's easy to use and yummy to eat. I'm someone who doesn't typically like protein snacks, but I'm telling you, this one is different. Made with 16 grams of protein and available in 6 classic flavors such as Cinnamon O's, Cookie Puffs, my personal favorite, the Lucky O's, PB Puffs, Choco Puffs, and Frosty Flakes. This is going to be your new go-to snack. You know how protein typically leaves a gross residue in your mouth or weird aftertaste? Not these, and I can say that because I've actually tried 4 of their flavors. Niva has done it right with the option to create your own bundles on their website, which means that if you're new to their brand, you can pick the flavors you want to try, or if you're a returning customer, you can custom build a bundle with your top flavor choices. Niva is a must-have for a quick protein-packed breakfast or afternoon pick-me-up, and they were generous enough to give her listeners a discount off their next Niva order. Use code HER to save 10% off your next order with Niva, and make sure to check them out on Instagram at Niva Snacks and nivasnacks.com. I'm telling you, this is one treat you don't want to wait around to try. You can feel good knowing you're getting some protein while enjoying that classic childhood cereal. Try Niva Snacks now and use code HER to save at checkout. Well, and I'm interested because obviously you've mentioned your cookum quite a bit. And when we were on the phone, you mentioned how your mushum and your cookum grew up very differently, but it felt like your cookum always was very pride, like had a lot of pride in her heritage. And I'm wondering, because obviously that was modeled to you for your whole life, if you can like speak to what that was like growing up.
For sure. Okay, so backstory. My gramps is Métis. And so he's Métis and then also half white. Half his dad is white and Indigenous, and then his mom was Métis. And so he also grew up in orphanages. So his mom died shortly after his youngest brother was born, and his father went to fight in the war. And so there was no one to take care of the kids, right? And so him and a few of his siblings were put into an orphanage. And some of his siblings were adopted out to different families. Like they were all over. They were somewhere in BC, somewhere in southern Saskatchewan, all over.
Which, like, interjecting, as you say that, and going back to what you said in the beginning about how when you walk into a room, you just like gravitate towards each other. That would have just been so, I can imagine, I obviously don't know, but just what a tear in the
and that's
in the
so
family
many
unit. Yes,
that's so many people's story, how they were separated and torn away from their siblings. And that's part of why they did it, right? Is because there's power in numbers, right? And so if you go into a situation where you're 1 or you're 2 or you're 3 of one people, you lose a little bit of power, right? And so that's what the government did. They separated First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children, usually from their family systems. So my gramps didn't grow up knowing what sisters or brothers or cousins or aunties or uncles or grandparents or moms and dads do, right? He grew up in an orphanage, and oftentimes with orphanages is if there wasn't enough room, the Indigenous children, the Métis children, they would be put into residential schools. And so without knowing, he would go from an orphanage to a residential school, to a different orphanage to a different residential school. And that was his childhood. And so we know about the history of those. And so I don't need to go into that. But essentially, the hatred and the anger about his culture and his people and the language and all of that was like beaten into him, right? It was so pushed into who he is. And so he struggled with that. And then my cookum, on the other hand, was raised by 2 Indigenous parents, and her mom only spoke Cree, and she went to day school. And so she got to go home at the end of the day. There was still a lot of trauma and terrible things that happened in day school, but she got to go home. She got to have a loving mom. She got to get hugged and kissed goodnight. She got to hear her language spoken. She got to participate in ceremonies and pick her medicines and eat her traditional foods. And so she was very proud of who she was. And so there was also like, she was just taught to be proud. And so there's a lot that she does, and I've noticed this as I become an adult. There was some shame. There was some things that she struggled with and like tried to change, you know, but overall she's really proud to be who she is, you know. And so I grew up like, they didn't speak the language in the home because it angered my gramps, which I understand.
So when you
now.
were growing up, you didn't hear
because they got married.
Yeah, they were married. So they were together, and they're still together, and they've raised all their children. And even my mom, sorry.
No, I want to ask a question, because when we were on the phone call, you're like, just ask questions if you have it. Yeah. I called him your mushum. Is that not accurate?
I don't call him mushum. So I call him Gramps.
Gramps. And is that because
he doesn't like the language.
Oh, okay. Because I was sitting here being like, is it because he's Métis or like?
No, so because he doesn't like the language.
Okay.
So
great. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
This.
And so, and like it angers him, right? Yes. So there's been times where like my kids, they go to a Cree immersion school and they're like, well, that's your mushum. And I'm like, but I call him Gramps. And he's piped up and been like, I'm Gramps. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, it just...
That's still there for him.
Yeah, of course. And you see it like now that I'm older and I understand a little bit of his story, and he's talked a little bit about it with me. I was really, really lucky to grow up really close with my parents. My grandparents. I spent every weekend there. Like sometimes I would spend like 2 or 3 weeks in the summer with them, and every day I talked to them on the phone. Like we're very close. So I've gotten opportunities to speak with him one-on-one. He won't talk about it in front of everybody, but I got opportunities to talk with him about what it was like growing up, you know, hearing a little bit of the stories. He doesn't go into grave detail about anything, but he'll share little tidbits of things that he went through. I understand now, you know, I get it. It makes sense. But yeah, so my mom, none of her, like my grandparents' children were really proud to be Indigenous either. My mom grew up in Martinsville, Saskatchewan, which is a very white town. Well, at that time, especially. Like she was chased and beaten up for being Indigenous, and she's tiny. Well, even inside of her, like there was a lot of shame. Like she didn't attend any ceremonies when I was a kid. We only attended like a family feast once a year. That was it. There was no smudging in our home when I was a kid. There was my dad's white, and so it was very white home. And besides the underlying traumas that had happened to my mom, you know, and that intergenerational ripple effect, it was a regular white home, and I didn't realize that until I was older. So my mom wasn't proud to be Indigenous at all.
But your grandma was like was she sharing the culture with you?
That's how I learned.
That's how you learned it.
And it's so much more than ceremonies. It's so much more than like a powwow. It's so much more. It's an everyday thing. It's an everyday thing that we commit to. It's picking medicines, like understanding when you can pick medicines, understanding, you know,
Can I ask a silly question?
Of course, there's no such thing as a silly question.
Can you explain what picking medicines?
Yeah, so there's almost all of the things that we struggle with in health-wise can be healed by something that comes from Mother Earth.
Yeah,
and
which I totally agree with.
So yeah, like we go and we pick like different teas, collect different barks, collect different roots.
Are you doing this daily, weekly, or like as needed?
Like as needed.
Okay.
As needed. So that's one of the teachings is that I grew up with, is that you only take what you need. And so if like, let's say, for example, my son was struggling when he was a baby with pooping. He wouldn't poop. He would go like 10 days without pooping, and his poor tummy was so sore. And my cookum I was like, you know, crying about it, and I was like, I don't know what to do. And we were actually out at a camp when he was about 3 or 4 months old. So like sometimes communities host culture camps, and that's like maybe 7 to 10, sometimes even 21 days of like out being on the land, actively participating in the culture. And that's one of the things that a lot of communities are doing to revitalize culture that was taken away. And so we were at a camp, and you know, I was like, I don't know what to do, like he won't poop. And so she took me out, and we went and put tobacco down. And that's one of the protocols, is that we offer tobacco for what we take from Mother Earth, and we give thanks for it. And then we picked what was needed. We went back, we made it. She prepared it for him. We put it in a little bottle for him. He drank it, and within like 15 minutes, he had pooped, and it was like the giantest poop in the world. But it was 10 days
Moms
worth
everywhere
of poop.
are like, I understand.
So, like 10 minutes, like, and it fixed his tummy.
Yeah.
And so all like that, and that's how I was raised. You know, I was raised with like getting bit by a mosquito, or not a mosquito, like a bee, or like stung by a bee, or bit by a wasp or something. And my cook comes like, all right, let's go get medicine. We go pick it and put tobacco down, give thanks for it, prepare it, and put it on our bite. And the pain went away. You know, having a rash, like I remember getting like eczema, like in the part of my arm here. And my cookum being like, okay, well, come out to my backyard. And my cookum, like I said, she still lives in Martinsville, and these medicines grow in her backyard naturally. Go out, put tobacco down, gather these leaves. She soaked them, put them on my eczema, and went to bed. I woke up in the next morning, and it was gone. And so that is how I was raised, you know. And so and that tobacco, that protocol is so important, to remember that we need to give thanks for the things that we take from Mother Earth, and to only take what we need. That's how I was raised. Like I was picking berries and all that kind of stuff. So
while navigating not upsetting your other grandparents.
Yeah. And like he was fine. Like he would come to our feasts, and he slowly, like my mom, like her story would be different, right? I grew up with my grandparents. I got completely different grandparents than like she got parents, and anyone will say that, right? Like the parents that you get too, depending on your sibling, like,
oh yeah, we all have different parents.
Exactly. Yeah. You're all going to get a different version, right? Like the mom and dad I got is so different than the mom and dad my youngest sister got. Like, and so I have to understand that, you know? And so sometimes my mom struggles with different things with her parents, and I'm like, how could you say that? Like they're the best. And then now, of course, that I'm an adult, I'm like,
and you have your own kids.
And I'm a mom, and I'm like I'm just so different in my parenting. And my son will even say, you used to do that differently. And I'm like, yeah, I did, but mom's growing, mom's changing.
It's our first time at this too.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I'm still learning, and you're never too old to learn. And so and never too old to make mistakes, and that's part of learning, right? And so I'm understanding that now. You know, I see it differently.
I'm curious what some of the things that you would want other people to know about the Plains Cree people, and also possibly misconceptions that there are of the Plains Cree people.
Well, that's a big question. Okay. Now, I also want to say I can't speak for all Plains Cree people.
Okay.
I can't speak for everybody.
Correct.
I can't speak for all Indigenous people. I can only speak for myself, and I can only speak for what I've learned in my short 29 years that I've been alive. Some things that I would like people to know. First and foremost, and it's something I always share, is we're so much more than our trauma. We're so much more than colonization and all that it's done to us. We have such a beautiful, rich culture. Even though, despite all of the attempts of genocide and the attempts of it being taken away from us, right? We still have it. You know, we might not have all of our ceremonies. There have been some ceremonies that maybe the last few people have passed on now that hold that ceremony, but we still have a lot of it, and we still have that connection to Mother Earth that can never be taken away. That connection to Mother Earth is so important, and that's like sometimes I get into, you know, discussions with people with, you know, okay, so you lived here in the prairies. We were nomadic people. We traveled. We followed our food source. We followed the bison, but another misconception is that we were just constantly moving. No, we would set up communities, and we would live there for like 5, 6, 10 years. As long as there was food, we stayed. That's why there's places like at Oskāyak that there's like teepee rings. There's places at Eagle Creek that there's teepee rings, because we had to be there for many, many years in order for those rings to develop over time, right? So that's a misconception, but that's part of we're getting into something bigger here. We have this deep connection with the territory that we live in. When the Europeans came here and they displaced us, they put us in all different areas. You know, they made us live in these small plots of land that usually weren't very good. There was no Canada to run to. There was no refuge for us to seek. First of all, because we have that deep connection to this land, but there was nowhere for us to go to keep us safe, right? Whereas Canada, and that's why so many people love Canada, right? It's this amazing place because it keeps so many people safe. It takes people away from genocide. It takes people away from active war and all of these things, and famines. And you know, one of the things when they were getting Europeans to come here was some of them were struggling with a famine that was going on. Like there was no food. And so they're like, come here where there's lots of food. But then Indigenous people were starving, you know? So we have that connection. And so that message is for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. That's something no one could take from us. And I feel it. Like when I go out on Mother Earth, sometimes I'm having a really hard day, and my oldest son, he has ADHD, and sometimes he really struggles with regulating himself. So my kokum has said, you know, take him outside, you know, sit him down on Mother Earth. And so we'll go and we'll sit down. Sometimes we'll even lay down in the backyard. We'll just lay, and all weather, you know, even in the wintertime, I'll bring a blanket outside and let's just lay here for 1 minute. And I feel her energy, you know, go through us and heal us and ground us essentially, right? And so that connection that we have in this territory as Indigenous people in wherever you're from can never be taken away from you.
I'm thinking about something you said about, you said we're so much more than our trauma. And I'm interested to get your perspective on this. So obviously, I feel like specifically in the last few years with social media, I'm interested to hear your take on, I feel like there's a lot of talk and conversation based around the trauma. And are you in a camp of like, okay, it's good to acknowledge it, but we should be talking also about the rest of us? Like, I'm just curious how you've navigated that, because your messages were so much more than this too.
So I can speak for myself, because I also recognize my privilege and how fortunate I've been to grow up with the kokum that I have, to grow up with culture, to grow up with ceremonies and all of that stuff. I totally know that not everybody has access to that. I understand that. And I also grew up with the trauma. I grew up with, you know, one of my grandparents attending residential schools, and I grew up with, you know, even the effects of the Indian Act. So I'm non-status because of the Indian Act. People always ask me why, and I'm like, well, it's not my choice. But I think that it's hard. We know though that those hard, sad stories sell. You know, those people probably wouldn't pay money to come and hear me talk about medicines, but they would pay money to go and hear someone talk about the abuse that they endured in residential schools. Yeah. You know, they would want to know. They want to know just how bad was it that your people are like this.
It's the clickbait factor.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
We're attracted to the negative.
They want to know. They want to know how bad was it? Like, and then also because it's a reason why, I mean, we can't blame residential schools for addictions and all of that, but we do understand that addictions come from trauma, right? Yeah. And so that it was a coping mechanism that was easier. And we also understand that in the healthcare system is terrible. So there's not much support for people that are struggling mentally or emotionally or spiritually even. And so I understand that, and I see that, and I do recognize that. But and why I share that message is we're so much more than our trauma is so people, I hope that I encourage people to pull through that, you know, to pull through those hard times and realize that there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is beauty in the darkness too, right? Like there is something that has to come out of all of this. There has to be something.
Yeah.
We can't have gone through all of that and just end up with houselessness and poverty and addictions and abuse and all of that. We have to have went through that. And one of the things, oh man, and it almost made me cry one time. I teach online, and I was talking with a group of students this September 30th in the Northwest Territories, and in the northern communities, they don't really have EAs, so they'll have family members come in. So they had a cook-up. They had two little old ladies in the classroom, and there I was talking about residential schools. And usually when I talk about residential schools, you know, I'll share about the stories, I'll share about the darkness, I'll share about all of that. But this time, I don't know, it was different. So I opened my Zoom meeting, and there I saw all those students. I asked them, how many of your family members went to residential school? Almost all of them raised their hands. How many of you have heard some of the stories? And they all raised their hands. I said, we're not going to talk about it today then. You don't need to hear about it. You don't need to hear about it from me. You know, you see it active in your community. Let's talk about some other stuff. And so my last message to those students was our ancestors, you know, a culture and language and all of that. It was essentially illegal. Like we weren't allowed to speak our language in the schools. You'd get beaten or abused. We weren't allowed to celebrate our culture, our ceremonies. It was against the law for many years for us to even gather and bang a drum. You know, we couldn't light our pipe. We couldn't go and ceremonies are so much more than just those gathering. It's go spending time out on the land. You know, there's places where some families meet every year, where they travel and they meet every year and they honor that land. It was illegal. There was the pass and permit system. And so I said to these youth, I said, you know what? Our ancestors went through what they went through for us to be here today. If it wasn't for them pushing, holding on to the little bit of culture that they had still deep in them, and then sharing it, if it wasn't for them doing that, we wouldn't be where we are today. You know, and so I hope that through that message, you know, people see that we are so much more than our trauma. We have such rich culture, rich connections, our kinship values, you know, like our families, our relatives, even just that kinship system that we hold within our culture is sacred, you know, that yeah.
Can you tell we like lean in?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I got you. I'm like, can you just expound on like the kinship?
Yeah. So, well, what is a kinship system? So kinship systems are our families. They're so much more than our families though for us. The way I was raised is that we're related to all of creation. So we're related to the water, we're related to the plants and the animals and the birds and the insects and even the mice. We're related to it all.
Not the mice.
I know I hate mice, but we're related to it all. And then also in our families though, those kinship systems are very sacred. They hold a great value, but they also hold a great responsibility. Like we're talking back to like Spider-Man, you know, with great power comes great responsibility, and that's what happens.
If you're in the market for new glasses or sunglasses, then you need to check out Canadian brand Kits Eye Care. Kits has become my favorite place to shop for sunglasses because they offer an amazing selection of so many great styles, and they are unbelievably affordable. They also have a huge selection of prescription eyeglasses, and you can do a virtual try-on while you are shopping online to really see how the styles will look on you. Kits is a Canadian-owned company, which you know we love, and they take pride in offering a wide selection, speedy service, and superior craftsmanship. We have a super special offer for our Her community. This offer is unreal, friends. Head to kits.ca, that's KITS.ca, right now to choose your favorite pair of Kits brand prescription glasses or sunglasses priced at or up to $99, and you're going to get them for free when you use the code WELCOME. Did you hear that? For free. You can follow along and connect with Kits on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Kits Eye Care. I love to follow along on Instagram to see the latest styles on Kits customers. And you can shop the entire Kits eyewear collection along with their curated selection of designer brands at kits.ca. Remember to use the code WELCOME to get your first pair of Kits up to $99 free, and then send us a DM and tell us which style you snagged. Happy shopping, friends.
It's so powerful, our kinship systems, you know, being an auntie, like I'll just, and in the Indigenous community, it's kind of become this like joke, you know, like, oh, she's an auntie, and, you know, it's, everyone's an auntie and everyone's an uncle. And so that is true, but it holds a responsibility. You can't just be called auntie and that's it. And so the way I was raised is that your aunties are your almost moms, and your uncles are your almost dads. And what do moms and dads do? They make sacrifices. And so as an auntie, I am my niece and nephew's almost mom. And so that means I have a responsibility to them to make sure they don't go without, to make sure that they have love and they have shelter and they have food. And maybe that means that I work extra hard, but that's my job as their almost mom. And so we also have this traditional adoption system where often through the passing of a relative, you will adopt like a kukum or a mushum or an auntie. Maybe your kukum passes away, and you will adopt a new kukum that you will call kukum, and you will have all of the duties to that kukum as you did your actual biological kukum. Even children, you know, sometimes people lose a child and then they adopt maybe their daughter's friend, you know.
And when you're saying adopt,
traditionally, just verbally, it's
yes,
not like a legal system where we go and we sign papers through the government. Our adoption systems are so much bigger than that, and they're lifelong. They're a lifelong commitment. And so even in the spiritual world, you'll have those parents and those adopted parents, those adopted grandparents that are your family. And so that's part of our kinship system. And so it also holds responsibility though. So like as a granddaughter, right? My grandparents worked really hard to take care of me all my life, you know, and now it's my job as their granddaughter to take care of them. And so that means maybe I'd miss out on some things because I have an obligation to take care of them. And that was our, you know, that community and that family system was so important. And through residential school and all of those terrible things that have happened, we lost a lot of that because how are you going to know? It's not talked about. It was shown by example. All of our teachings, all of our culture, it was shown. You don't know what an auntie does because someone says, hey, this is what an auntie is. You know, because you grew up with aunties. You grew up with grandparents. You grew up with brothers and sisters. You grew up with cousins and great grandparents. And so what do? No one tells you this is what a kukum does and this is her job. No, it's your kukum just does that. So if you don't grow up with that, you don't know how to do that. And so that's why our kinship systems have really suffered, because you spend like 10, 12 years never having an auntie. Like my gramps, he had no idea what like why my kukum's nieces and nephews were always at the house. Like, why are they here? Why are they living here now? There's 5 of them. We already have 5 kids. Why do we have more kids? And because he didn't grow up with that.
Yeah.
I remember one time when I was in high school, I went to this party and this girl was drinking with her mom and her kukum. I was like, whoa, kukums don't drink. That's not what a kukum does. Why is your kukum here partying with us? And I was just like, what on earth is happening here? But those kinship systems have been damaged, you know? And so, but we still have people that know them. You know, we still have people, and it takes time to learn them. You're never too old to learn them. My mom has done so much work healing to realize, what does a kukum do? What does a mom do? What does that look like? You know? And so, so I've seen that. I know it's never too late. And so like, that's one of the things that, we went all over the place with this answer. But
I love it, Jasmyn.
So good.
But okay, so let's go back to misconceptions. And so I would say, you know, for both of us on the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous side, that might be something that's common, that we think that we lost it all too. We often think that like, well, we don't have our language, we don't have our culture, and maybe you don't, but there's so much access to it now. And that's one of the reasons why I do what I do, because I want to revitalize it. I want to, my kids get to learn it in school now, which is beautiful. Like my kids get to go put tobacco down, they get to smudge, they get to learn how to sing like drum and all of that. But I see my friends and older, they didn't have that opportunity in school. You know, I've taught Kookums how to sew moccasins. You know, my auntie, she has her own story, but she essentially didn't get to learn her culture growing up. It was not something she was proud of. She had reached out to me and she said, you know what, I really want to learn how to make moccasins. And I was like, okay, well, come over. And so she would come over and I taught her how to make moccasins. So at like in her 50s, she is reconnecting to her culture. That was essentially taken away from her, right? And so there is so much opportunity out there now. And so I hope that, you know, Indigenous people take those opportunities. You know, it's now within our own hands. We can't blame anyone else anymore. We can't say, well, I don't know my language. There's apps. There's classes that are free online via Zoom that you can just play in the background. You know, sometimes I join in on those Zoom classrooms while I'm cooking supper. Just turn my camera and mic off, and I'll listen to those language speakers, and my kids will run around and it's just playing in the background, because that's how our language was. Our language was never just sit down and here's how you learn it.
Yeah.
It was just spoken, right? And so, you know, keeping in mind that, you know, learning a few of those words, saying them on a regular basis, is so powerful. You know, going out and understanding that we have a connection to Mother Earth. Go by the river. If you live in Saskatoon, she holds so much power. And put some tobacco inside of her, in the water, and just give thanks. You know, that's your culture. You're actively participating in culture when you do something like that. Those things, eating your traditional foods, you know, if you have access to a hunter or something like that, you know, eating those foods, those will wake up things inside of your body. Once those tastes are alive in our body, and they'll get woken up.
Yeah.
So, you know, I feel like there's so much out there that we can do now.
I think you've just done a beautiful job of addressing Indigenous people and how they can be involved in their culture. But what about us? Like, I mean, I know, and we spoke about this on the phone, but, and those who follow me know, we've recently taken in a new child into our home, and he's wonderful, and he's Cree and Dene. And at one point I looked at him and I was like, how do I not create a totally white home for you? Because I think it's important, right? And I'm wondering, so my two questions are like, how do we come alongside and respectfully learn your culture? I'm looking at the beautiful ribbon skirt you have on. Obviously, they're so beautiful. And I think my fear, and I know I can speak openly to you, is do I wear this and now I've done something insensitive, right? And I wonder, because I feel like you're good at this, if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So this is another big question. And again, I can't speak for everybody, because I do have this conversation with my Indigenous friends. And so this is a 2-part answer. And it's deep. It's not simple, right? It's not just, we'll just do it. You might get backlash. And that's something that it's not your fault. But usually when people get mad, it's not about you. It's about them. So when we hurt people unintentionally, it's not your fault. It's about them. It's their own healing journey. And so I have, and so I'll answer part of it, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of how I was raised. So you might ruffle some feathers. You know, that's part of the process. You have to understand the pain. You have to understand that, like I said, it was illegal for us to practice our language and practice our ceremonies and hunt and process our leather so we can create beautiful things like moccasins and mucklucks and leather vests and all those things, and dresses that we would wear. It was illegal for us to gather and dance powwow. It was illegal for us to feast together. So you have to understand the pain that comes with that. And then, now this again, and I know some Indigenous people are going to be like, what is she saying? that's not right. But the way I was raised was our culture, our ceremonies, they're not just for Indigenous people, they are for people. No one can say you can't go out and give thanks to Mother Earth. No, we can't claim that as Indigenous people. We can't claim that connection. We can't claim giving thanks to our water when we drink it. When I drink my water, I was taught, it's like a smudge. It's like smudging. So I put my thoughts into my water when I drink it. I hold it and, I'm like, thank you for today. Thank you for my ancestors. Thank you for my family, all of that. And I drink it, and essentially I'm pouring all of that gratitude into my body. No one can say that only Indigenous people can do that. And so that's how I was raised. I was raised by the late Simon Kaitway allowing anyone to attend ceremonies. Mm-hmm. Like I grew up with all people in the lodge, all colors, all genders, all everything. And so I remember my kukum saying, well, who are we to say that they can't? Who are we? We can't hold that and say that that's just ours. And that's the way it was. You think about if Indigenous people were gatekeepers, and if Indigenous people were the kind of people that we have become to because of our pain and our trauma and our anger towards colonial systems, settlers would not be here. There's no way we would have killed them all. They wouldn't have been able to infiltrate as hard and as far as they did.
Right.
Because when they came here, we met them with open arms. We met them and we said, oh, you don't have a winter jacket, you don't have a coat, you don't have mucklucks to survive in this weather. And if you go way up north, that's what they do too. If you go into the Northwest Territories and into Nunavut, they will greet you and they'll say, what are you wearing? You need seal skin mitts to survive this weather. And they will give you a pair of seal skin mitts.
Yeah.
And that's the way we were. They came here off their boats, and they came here, on horseback and through horse and carriage, and they didn't have proper medicines. They didn't have vitamins, and a lot of them struggled with vitamin C. And so we made them rosehip tea, and we said, you're sick, you need to drink this. And we boosted up their vitamins, and we shared our medicines, we shared our ceremonies. It's not our way to think that we can hold on to something. It's not our way to think that only we have the right to this. That's not humility. And that's one of the very first teachings you learn. That's one of the very first things that we learn. It is to have humility, to understand that we are no better than anyone else, we are no better than creation, than the rock on the ground that you're walking on. You're no better than that rock. And so that's how I was raised. And I'm so thankful to have been raised that way, because I'm able to share in this way. And so there's that part. Now, the other part is we can't claim ribbon skirts, and we can't claim beadwork, and we can't claim moccasins, because all tribes all across the world make something like it. I was at the Ukrainian Museum last week, and there is skirts there that the very first Ukrainian people came here wearing, and they have ribbon on them. There's 3 ribbon across the bottom. How can we say that these are ours? Also, we didn't have ribbon a long time ago. Ribbon came from contact. Ribbon and cotton came from contact. Beads came from contact. We had something similar. We had quill work. We had tufting. We would dye our leathers and create beautiful artwork out of it. We do have some sacred patterns and some things that tell a sacred story, right? We do have some patterns that were our, what is it called? Hieroglyphics? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Where we drew them in the stone. Yeah. And that's our sacred things that we can have, and we do recreate on some of our regalia and some of our beadwork. So we can say, if you don't understand that story, don't be copying some of the things you see on Instagram and Google. Don't be mimicking those. But we can't lay claim to flowers. We can't say like, oh, this is this particular floral beadwork, because there's flowers all over Mother Earth. We can't say that we designed that flower. Mother Earth did. So we can't, right? And so, I've met like people from Sudan that like do the weave beadwork necklaces with seed beads, with glass beads, like we use in our regalia and stuff like that. The exact same. So how can we say that this is ours? And that'll ruffle feathers. I know there's going to be Indigenous people that are like, what is she talking about? And I'm sorry. And I understand like we're all on our own journey. And I totally, and like, and it's okay to be angry about it. It's okay. As long as you're not hurting other people doing so.
And I can appreciate that if I was in a position where I had felt like someone had come and stolen my culture and was now wearing it and whatever, I can appreciate that I would probably feel like
take it off
because this was a problem. And for some of you wearing it, I might still be a problem to you. So that's why I asked, because obviously like I've seen your ribbon skirts, and you made this pink one time, and I was like I love that skirt, but I was like, I really struggled. Like I was like, am I going to be?
And so even skirts, like I was told that those are for women to wear, to acknowledge ourselves as women on Mother Earth. And so that's why people that also identify as women wear ribbon skirts.
Right.
And so we identify ourselves as women when we wear our ribbon skirts, that we walk in pride and we respect our gifts that we have been given, because only us have our heartbeat heard from the inside.
Right. So you're saying like as a woman,
you can wear it.
Yeah, wear it.
And so, but I also say like, but make sure you're also doing it in a good way.
Yeah.
You know, make sure that you're not wearing them to the bar. You're not wearing them like, you know, to go clubbing or around alcohol too. I know, excuse me, I just burped into the mic.
I love it.
But you know, even myself, I've wore ribbon skirts to gatherings, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone's drunk here. And I'm like, I feel so bad to wear this here. And so I'll go home and I'll smudge it, and I'll cleanse it, and I'll honor it in that way, because it does carry stories. It does carry teachings. There is teachings within the ribbon. Sometimes it's just fashion. Sometimes you're like, oh my God, I love the way the pink and the blue look together. So let's just make a pink and blue ribbon skirt, and it's going to be fully stacked, and it's going to have pockets, and it's going to have drops, and it's going to have lace at the bottom. And because I like it and it's pretty, and that's fine. And then there's going to be some ribbon skirts that in ceremony you were gifted these colors. And so when I attend this lodge, I will wear this ribbon skirt.
Yeah.
So there's so many different things to it.
Yeah.
I would say, and almost anything, as long as you're well-intentioned, it's okay. That being said, well-meaning white people can still do harm.
Yes.
You know? And so, you know, sometimes we have those people that are like, I learned this, and now I want to do it. Because of the spiritual connection to some of our stuff, like ribbon skirts, I don't think non-Indigenous people should be selling them and making them and selling them. I mean, if you have a storefront and you want to allow an Indigenous maker to sell, that's different. But I don't think that they should be making them and profiting off them. And that's just rooted in our history. Yep. And so I would say that. I don't think that non-Indigenous people should be mimicking some of our designs and selling them. You know, some of our designs, you know, even our diamonds, it seems like such a simple design, but it carries a story. And so I would say that. So it is a very complex answer for yourself as a mom raising an Indigenous child now. You have an obligation to him to dive deep into learning his culture, and learning his culture for the beauty and all of that it is, but also educating him on, you know, the traumas. My kids, my 4 and 5 year old knew what residential school was when they were 4 and 5. Yeah. You know, my kids knew why we don't speak our language. Their dad speaks many languages, and they're like, Mom, why don't you speak Cree? I explained to them, you know, Gramps didn't like Cree spoken at school because when he was little, he was told that Cree was not good. When you spoke Cree, you were speaking evil words. And so that's why I explained it to him. You know, that's why I don't have my language. And so they were like, oh, I said, but it's not evil words. It's beautiful. And it's carries so much power and connection. And our language is written in the earth. It's written in the land. Our language is so much more than just a literal sense. It's a spiritual sense as well. And so I told them that. And so, you know, now they're proud. Oh my gosh, my son, his hair is so long, it's past his butt, my middle boy, but he won't let me brush it. And so yesterday, you know, and I know it's terrible. And I'm like, if we don't brush your hair, we're going to have to cut it. And he's crying, but I'll lose my strength. And I'm like, I know my son, because my cookum taught them that you have long hair as a young man because that's where you hold your strength.
Yeah.
It's not in your muscles. Your strength is held in your hair. And so he's like, I'll be so weak. And I'm like, oh, my son, well, then let me brush it. And so it's happened multiple times because he's got a very sensitive scalp. But, you know, he holds on to that. And so as a mom, you have an obligation now. And, you know, honestly, as all people here living in Treaty 6 or whatever treaty you're living in, you have an obligation to learn about the past. When you travel, you go to Italy, you're going to be like, I want to know about the history of this land. I want to go to these buildings that have been standing here for like hundreds and maybe even thousands of years. I want to know about it. But yet here we live in Canada, on Turtle Island, maybe in the United States too. And we just live. We don't think about the stories that are written in the land. We don't think about the stories that, you know, come here, that are come with this place. Yeah. So I would say that all people have an obligation to learn about not just our traumas, but the beauty of our culture.
You've done
that was so good. I'm like, she's gonna round this out so good, right?
Jasmyn,
here.
like such a wonderful job.
Oh my gosh, I got like emotional.
Same.
I was like, listen to you, because I think we really are in a space of, and I have found conversations with you to be so freeing, to be like, I know Jasmyn's gonna like meet me where I'm at, and I can just be like,
which is life-giving.
Because now you can, what kept going through my head was what my dad has said to me, which is always like, seek first to understand. Like, seek first to understand, right? We don't need to go into situations with our opinions or you know, our made up thoughts. We can go, I'm just going to ask. And if I come with that, then you'll come and hopefully meet me there too. So you did such a beautiful job today. And I know it was last minute, so I'm so happy you were able to come out. We like to end things with asking our guests what the best piece of advice is that they've ever received.
The best piece of advice. That's a really big question. I feel like there's lots. And so I'm thinking about all of the stories and the things that I've grown up learning. I would say, I talked about it lots, but humility. And this is truly how we run our lives in my culture and in my family, is that no one is better than anyone. It doesn't matter how rich or poor, educated, uneducated, old or young, healthy or unhealthy, deep in addiction or not deep in addiction. Doesn't matter where you are at in your life. No one deserves to be treated any better or any less than anyone else. Everyone deserves to have the same access and the same rights to the things that you need to survive and to thrive, whether that be medication, shelter, healthcare, education, food and water, technology. If one deserves to have it, then so does the other. And so I would say that is one of the things, and that's how I run my life. That's how I go into situations. And I try to be mindful of that, and I think about, as a society, we've lost greatly. We've never had so many issues like we have today, especially with houselessness and poverty and all of that. I look back hundreds of years ago and no one went without.
Yeah.
And now we struggle. And so I think about that.
We hold things.
Yeah.
Tight, right?
Yeah. Why do we have...
It's an I mentality rather than
100%. And I talk about this with schools. I tell students, how many of you go grocery shopping and fill someone else's fridge?
Yeah.
None of you. But yet in our communities, we would go hunting, and it was first feed others and then feed yourself.
Wow.
And that's still practiced in a lot of communities where people will go hunting. And, I was in a community at the beginning, mid to end of September, and they had went hunting and they got 2 moose, and the school got together and they harvested the moose. Like, all of the students, they all got to take meat home. They all got to cut it up. They all got to take the skin off and learn how to process it to make leather and all of that. And we don't do that. We don't do that anymore. No one's thinking about, I wonder if this person has water to drink. I wonder if this person has access to a bathroom. Like how we hold on to those things, and how we don't think that, how we just think that, they've made choices, so they are struggling, so they don't get access to it now because of the choices that they've made, And so that's how I was raised. I remember my cookum, the same man coming up to her for like 2 years with a new story every time. I'm trying to get to China. I'm trying to get milk and Pampers, like all kinds of stories. And my cookum would always give him change. He knew 100% my cookum was going to give him change. And I asked my cookum, I think I was like 16 at the time. And I was like, why are you always giving this guy money? We see him at least once a week. She's like, well, he needs it. It's okay. Why wouldn't I? I'd give you money if you asked. And I was like, true. So
and why is it on us to decide how someone else uses it?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Because no one's going into your bank account when you get paid and saying, okay, you can't buy alcohol with this.
Yeah.
You can't buy takeout with this.
Yeah.
There's no one, thank goodness, no one's saying that.
Yeah.
So who are we to say otherwise? So I don't know. That's just, humility is so important.
No, I totally agree. I'd love for you to leave our listeners with where, if you want them to be able to follow you and find you, and also your ribbon skirts and any other resources that you want to shout out and think are important.
Okay. Well, my Instagram handle is kind of hard. Nokum Okiskamoana, which means my grandmother's teachings. So that's all I have is my grandmother's teachings. And so that's my Instagram name.
Well, we just loved having you on. It was so great to hang out with you, and I can't thank you enough. Yeah, it was amazing.
Oh,
thank you, Jasmyn.
Awesome.
Thank you everyone for joining us on this episode of the Her Podcast. If you want to follow along with us, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at its.her.podcast. We can't wait to see you there.